Awesemo baseball fans, what's happening? Terry McBride here with my pal Chris Pinnell. We're going to go through the MLB slates for you today. We're focused on two slates. We're going to focus on the later afternoon slate, the 4-gamer on both sites that starts in the 3 o'clock window somewhere. And then we're going to focus on the main slate, which is different from site to site. Of course, we've got 7 games on FanDuel starting at 6:40. We've got 5 games on DraftKings starting at 7:05. Should be a good one. Looks like it's shaping up 2 interesting slates across the afternoon. We're brought to you by PrizePicks today, which we'll get into in a little bit, but they're a great sponsor. I encourage everybody to check them out. We got a ton of people winning money over on PrizePicks. Before we dive in, Chris, how you doing, man? How's everything going with you? It's been a minute since we've been on a show together.
Yeah, what's up, Terry? Looking forward to another show. I believe my first MLB show was with you right around opening day, and it was a good time. So I'm looking forward to do it again. We have like 4 total slates today. Like you said, only covering about 2 just to focus on, but should be fun. We got a fun slate today.
Yeah, absolutely. It should be a good one. And just, we can take a quick peek before we dive into what's on the sidebar there with all the games that we're actually going to go through. We've got confirmed lineups for those 2 early games. If anybody out there is playing that 12:35 slate, do you have any specific feelings about anything going on here? It looks like there's basically one good pitcher on any of the 4 mounds here, and it's Dylan Bundy. A lot of meh the rest of the way. Do you have any specific feelings about the lineups that any of the teams are rolling out? Any specific players you'd be targeting on that slate?
My general thoughts on that slate is that it's just meh. I mean, we have a 2-gamer and the one game that looks at least decent for pitching with Dylan Bundy. There's some rain in the forecast too. So I guess there is potential this could get knocked down to, I'm not sure if they could even turn it into a showdown slate. So there's a potential we completely lose the slate in general. For me, it would just be pretty heavy on the Twins, and I wouldn't mind some Rockies versus Zach Thompson, but overall, it's not really a slate that I'm going to try to mess with too much.
Yeah, I think this is one that I totally agree is, better left just on the table than just skip it and move on. And yeah, it is looking, I hadn't even thought about that, but yeah, 78% chance of rain in Minnesota, probably not good for the lifespan of the 2-game slate here. So it looks like we do have some weather to worry about in the later slate. I don't know that there's anything in the 3 o'clock hour, the first games that we'll dive into. So we'll go through those and then we'll talk some of the weather situations. It looked like 4 out of the 7 games on the FanDuel slate had at least some concerns about some rain. So we'll get into that in a sec. But guys, make sure to hit the like, hit the subscribe down there. Helps us out a ton. Helps you find out when we're going live. Helps you find out, keep up with all our offers, our shows, our giveaways, all that fun stuff. Once you subscribe, hit the notification button. That's what I just told you to do. So I should actually read these things before I start saying them and letting the words come out of my mouth. But what we do have at the site for you guys today is free tools and data. That would be the MLB main slate ownership projections, NBA player projections, NHL top stacks, and PGA top golfers. A lot going on for free up at the site. So check it out. Hit the like, hit the subscribe. Let's dive into this one. We've got the first game on deck. The Mets with Thomas Szapucki on the hill going up against the Giants with Jacob Junis going. What are you thinking about the pair of pitchers here? Any thoughts on Szapucki in particular? He's 5,500 on that DK slate. It's kind of cheap. I don't think he actually exists on FanDuel today, but that's kind of a cheap discount target there. And then we can walk into Junis, who we've got a little bit more of a book on.
Yeah, I downloaded this FanDuel CSV. I didn't get a price pop up for him, so I'm just assuming he's not on them there because FanDuel definitely leaves off some players here and there. But looking at Szapucki, he's getting a spot start here, getting caught up from the minors. Made a start last year, didn't go well. I believe he gave 6 runs in that game, but it's a very small sample size. But the hope here is just to eat some innings, give him some length. And so far in the minors, a 33% carry with a 3.4 xFIP, so it's not like he's been awful. Problem is he is facing a pretty good Giants team. Definitely have some righties they can throw at him. 4.5 implied run total against him. So I'm not super excited about it. He is dirt cheap, though. I will give him that. But I'm just not really sure I want to go with him on this slate. And as far as Junis is concerned, tougher matchup here versus the Mets. They definitely have a lot of good bats, and I wouldn't mind with the Mets stack. And I think Junis might be a little bit priced up close to $8,000.
Yeah, it's an interesting price tag on him. 8,500 on that FanDuel slate. Not really drawing any ownership to speak of whatsoever. But he's really, not a great target in terms of pitchers. I know, people were excited about him a little bit when he was dirt cheap at the beginning of this season when he first signed to San Francisco. But now up at 8,500, going up against a pretty decent Mets lineup, I don't really want to tangle with it. You do get positive leverage on him. You do get positive leverage on Szapucki on the DK slate. So there are reasons, I guess, for that to go there. But I think there's probably just better spots to dump our pitching shares into today. There maybe some, if you want to peel off a couple dart throws at the value price, like is he at 5,500 on that DK slate? That's 1,000 cheaper than any other pitcher on the board. That's 1,000 less than Fede. So does that make him kind of your value target just based on that price, regardless of talent and matchup?
I think it would have to be because there's no chance I'm going to play Fede versus the Dodgers, especially with how hot they've been. So if I have to go down, dumpster diving, I think Sapucki's definitely a guy that I can get to. I mean, the minor league numbers haven't been too bad. I just don't really like picking on San Francisco too often, but with getting some slight leverage there on the top pitchers tool, I think it's definitely worth a few dart throws.
Yeah, and San Fran, definitely a good team, definitely a team that plays that platoon game and can stack some righty hitters against the kid here. So not a safe spot by any means. Who are you looking at? I assume you would be going to some San Francisco bats in that equation in different lineups to offset those shares of the pitcher. So who are you looking at in terms of the lineup on the San Francisco side?
Yeah, just looking at the projected lineup here, if we can get Darren Ruff at the top, Wilmer Flores, Evan Longoria, just getting some of these righties here versus Sapucki. We also have Padlo, at least I pronounce his name, at 2K, potentially batting in the middle of the order. I wouldn't mind that, but not really a hard stack to get to. Like, these guys are dirt cheap. So, I mean, value-wise, if you probably want to spend up on some pitching, getting some of these giant stacks with a decent implied run total relative to how they're priced, I don't think it's a bad way to go.
Makes sense. And then what about on the other side? You throwing any Mets back at Jacob Junis? It does look like they're pulling a whole hell of a lot of ownership up toward the top on the short slate here. Any reason to go to Mets bats even with the chalk on them? And then are you playing any of the down lineup guys where the ownership gets a little lighter?
Yeah, I know they're a good lineup. I was kind of surprised how much ownership they were pulling in. It seems a little high in my opinion. Maybe that gets updated throughout the day. But Junis, I mean, he's not a terrible pitcher. It's just for DFS purpose, he's not that exciting to me. He's got a 3.5 xFIP so far this year, 19% K rate, doesn't walk anybody, gets a decent amount of ground balls, doesn't allow much hard contact. I realize this is a great lineup. You have Nimmo, Marte, Lindor, Alonso, McNeil, like the list goes on. Very solid from top to bottom. Definitely kind of trails off there at the bottom, but I think that might be a little bit overowned for me. I mean, if you're looking at the top stacks, they are drawing some pretty negative leverage, actually the worst negative leverage on the entire slate. So I think it's probably a good spot to be underweight. I still want exposure to them because there's not that many games and they're still a good stack, but I do think they're going a little bit overowned.
Yeah, and it's a little difficult to get too far away from them, at least, in total, because of how short a slate it is. But I do think there are spots that you can dive into, some under-owned bats like an Eduardo Escobar, maybe like a Dom Smith, even with all his struggles, 189, 274, 243 going into yesterday with no home runs. I didn't get a chance to update the individual stats this morning in my model here, but that's not good. But he's not owned. He's 2,100, 2,200 across sites. So there are targets that are under-owned and underpriced in that lineup still. I think we'll see what the final version that rolls out is. But I do think you can go there, and just if you're going to the popular bats, it's just a matter of trying to offset them with a little bit of a sneakier lower-owned pitchers. So few options to do that with, but I think you can get there. Do you have a favorite bat from each team?
So if I had to pick one from the Giants, as of right now, it's probably going to be Wilmer Flores. I always like playing him versus lefties. And as far as the Mets go, it's tough. Lots of good bats here. I'm thinking I'd probably just have to roll out Nimmo leading off at 43 and a bucks. I usually always like to play him. I know he's not the hugest power guy, but I've always been a sucker for him.
Yeah, great player. Love that on base skill and just excellent correlation play. And somebody who can, hit you the occasional home run. He can drive the ball, and he's very good for individual scoring as well. All right, so that covers that game, I think, pretty much top to bottom. Let's move on to the next one before we hit lock for the first slate here. We've got the Dodgers going up against the Nats. Dodgers with Julio Urias on the hill. Eric Fede answering for the Nats. We already kind of touched on Fede a little obliquely there. 6,500, the second value pitcher on the board on the DK slate. 7,200 on the FanDuel slate. Only 1% owned. I don't think I would even get to 1% if I were playing this slate. Not against this Dodgers team, kind of like you were saying before. Any reason in the world to get to Fede, price, or anything like that?
The only reason I could even mention to where you'd want to play Fede is because the small slate and there's really no options that are great down low. But even then, rostering Fede versus the Dodgers is probably a recipe for disaster. His numbers this year, 4.2 xFIP, 20% K rate, 12% walk rate. He doesn't get hammered. He's kind of an annoying guy to stack against, but it's the Dodgers. They've been on fire the past 2 nights. I wouldn't be surprised if they put up close to 10 again.
Yeah, and they're drawing a ton of ownership for that performance, at least on the top end of the lineup. And it looks like the bottom end of the lineup is picking up some of the popularity as well on the short slate. So the Dodgers are going to be difficult to stack, but I do think they're worth grabbing. Maybe you string together just some weird stacks with mostly the bottom of the lineup hitters and then like a Max Muncy or a Will Smith on FanDuel. But even Will Smith, the catcher on FanDuel, is drawing nearly 30% ownership on this slate. It's just difficult to put them together. What about Urias going against the Nationals? Do you have any feel for Urias here? It looks like he's not drawing that much popularity on FanDuel, only 7.8%.
Yeah, I do like him on DK. I believe he's fourth in our top pitchers tool, or fifth actually behind Blackburn. The reason I like him is just because I think he can be fine from a run prevention standpoint and get a cheap win. The problem is he is just not striking out anybody this year. I believe he was sitting around 26% last season. We are now down to 18.9%. Smaller sample size this year for sure, but doesn't walk anybody. Is giving up more power, close to 50% fly ball rate. But still, I think he's fine from a run prevention standpoint. The Washington Nationals, outside of a couple bats, he's going to be fine. You get that lefty on lefty spot versus Soto, which kind of neutralizes him a bit because he's definitely been struggling versus lefties so far this year. So I think he's a better DK play at sub 9K over on FanDuel at nearly $10,000. Might be a little bit tougher to get to.
Yeah, it's a high price, but with that lack of popularity, I do think that's an interesting spot. I think you can throw pitchers against this Nationals team a lot of the time. Like you said, Soto in the hole, he's kind of struggling for who he is. 245, 381, 452, still a 206 ISO, 8 home runs, creating runs 38% better than average. He's just that good that even his bad year looks good compared to everybody else. But that triple slash is not characteristic of him. He's normally a much better hit tool guy, still walking 17.5% of the time, striking out just 13.8%. So I think he'll be fine in the long run, but it's not exactly where you'd expect to see him. And yeah, I'm not really worried about anybody else there. So yeah, sign me up for some Urias on this slate, particularly on FanDuel, where it looks like he's a little bit underowned. I'm not really going to sweat the strikeout rate on this slate, but I do think that's concerning in the long term. It looks like the swinging strikes are down a little bit. The CSW is down a little bit. The home run rate is up pretty dramatically, 2.55% last year, 4.27% in the small sample this year. So definitely some warts, but for the lack of ownership in the ceiling, I think you kind of got to go to them. What about Nationals bats? Would you be going to any of like the Juan Soto, Nelson Cruz, Josh Bell combos? Anybody in there that interests you in particular?
Yeah, I mean, he's a solid pitcher, but this year he has shown some weaknesses. So if you're trying to get some unknown bats, like a guy like Lane Thomas, I know in FanDuel a couple of days ago versus Tyler Anderson, he picked up like close to 50% ownership on my FanDuel single entries. And not sure he's going to get that popular today, but I don't think Lane Thomas is a bad play up top. You have Ruiz. If you want to play Soto, I guess it's a decent tournament spot, but he has not been that great versus lefties this year. But he's still one of the best bats in baseball, and he's sub 5K over on DK. Cruz, he's certainly aging. He is cheap versus a lefty, but it's definitely not been the old Nelson Cruz that we've been used to the past couple of seasons. Then you have Josh Bell up top. After that, definitely falls off quite a bit. But if you're looking for a contrarian stack, the Nationals, with the way Urias has been pitching this year, it might not be the worst thing, but it's not really something I could get on board too much.
Yeah, they're getting a little bit of positive leverage down at the bottom of the board on the DK slate. They're third from the bottom on FanDuel, getting, again, a little bit of positive leverage. It's just a tough ask, though. There's not a lot of great bats in that lineup. I would definitely, I agree. I would be looking at Lane Thomas up top. They finally got Cesar Hernandez out of that leadoff spot, as ridiculous as that situation was. And yeah, if you told me 6 months ago, we're just at the beginning of this season on opening day when we talked, that I wouldn't be rostering much of Nelson Cruz at 2,800 against a middling lefty, I would be completely shocked. But I think we're kind of there. 205, 282, 301 with a 0.096 ISO. That is just not Nelson Cruz, man. So we'll see what happens, but hopefully he comes back to life a little bit. 44.4% hard hit and 10.3% barrel rate, kind of encouraging, but not a ton there. Anything else to cover from this one, or should we move on?
It's going to be pretty Dodger heavy for me in this one.
Yeah, I think so. Let's take a look. We'll jump over to the Athletics going up against the Mariners. The A's have Paul Blackburn on the hill, kind of an option that people like to go to for DFS. He comes in at an effective price on DK. He's probably expensive at 9,500 on FanDuel, but not drawing any ownership. Not a huge strikeout rate to speak of, but maybe a little bit interesting from just a quality of pitcher perspective going up against the Mariners. And then Robbie Ray, who's just drawing all the popularity in the world. Every low owned pitcher that we talked about already and are going to talk about, all their ownership is going to Robbie Ray here. He's pushing 80% on the DK slate at 8,000. He's pushing 60% on FanDuel at 9,300. He's by far my highest projected pitcher on this slate. Do you agree that Robbie Ray against this pathetic Oakland lineup is the best spot on the board as far as a pitcher just in a total vacuum?
Yeah, I 100% agree. Like DraftKings prices him so low each and every single slate. I know he hasn't been as good as he was last year, but we're still talking about a guy with a 26% K rate, 3.75 xFIP. The walks are a little bit up there at 9% this year, and obviously giving up the fly balls and a little bit of pop. But at $8,000 versus Oakland, I mean, I'd play a lot of guys that are $8,000 versus Oakland. Robbie Ray, we know, has plenty of upside. I think he can strike out definitely at least a half a dozen here. And at 8K and $9,300, definitely looking like the top pitcher on the slate.
Yeah, throwing in just a monster projection in my model here, well above what a guy for 8,000 should be able to do. So yeah, I would definitely be firing up some Robbie Ray. It's difficult to say that, yeah, I would go out and roster 60% of them if I was playing 150 lineups, but it's a 4-game slate. He's easily the best starter here. What about Blackburn on the other side of this one? On that FanDuel slate, he's 200 more than Robbie Ray. On DK, he's 200 less than Robbie Ray. He's drawing like a seventh of the ownership over there. Is he interesting to you going up against the Mariners here? 20.7% strikeout rate, but a pretty good xFIP and some good peripherals.
Yeah, on FanDuel, it's really hard to make the case. I mean, $200 more than Robbie Ray, really tough to get there. On DK, you can certainly make a better case for him at sub $8,000. I know last year he just was not striking out anybody, like a 13% K rate after last season, but I mean, close to 21% this year, 2.8 xFIP, which is really good. Doesn't walk anybody. It doesn't really give up any power whatsoever. Only a 22% fly ball rate. I don't think he's a terrible option versus Seattle. They do have some decent bats in that lineup, but I wouldn't say they're the most overpowering offense in the world. So I think Blackburn, decent play. I believe he's getting some positive leverage on the top pitchers tool. Yeah, second best leverage. So yeah, I don't think it's a bad spot, especially in tournaments.
Yeah, and it's, it's weird to justify that in your head saying, hey, 200 more going to Paul Blackburn on the FanDuel slate, but 2.4% of the public there going up against the Seattle team that you mentioned. He's been good with suppressing power. He's got a 2.9 degree average launch angle. So the ball's primarily going into the ground, 43.9% hard hit. But if it's going into the ground, I don't really care. Only a 4.9% barrel rate and a 0.61% home run rate over 42 and a third so far this year. So he has definitely been effective keeping the ball in the yard. And the Mariners against right-handed pitching have no power to speak of so far this season. They're sitting 27th with 27th in both ISO and home run rate, 1.99% home run rate and a 115 ISO. That's going into yesterday, another tool I didn't get a chance to update before the show, but I think that's a good spot for him. I think it's at least a situation where he can likely pitch clean, get you to that quality start bonus. I question whether they're going to be in line for the win, but I think he can give you 6 clean with a couple of Ks here against this lineup. So I think he's at least interesting for ownership, and on DK, interesting for price and ownership. What about bats against him, though? Taking some of these Mariners bats, we had Kyle Lewis come back to the lineup. Taylor Trammell's back in the lineup now. They've got Julio Rodriguez, Eugenio Suarez. There's a lot of bats to like. I think there is a lot of quality in this Mariners lineup. Would you throw stacks back at against Blackburn here?
Yeah, at the same time, how we do like Blackburn, I think at the same time, since it's such a small slate, you can have some interest in these Seattle bats. I mean, Jesse Winker leading off, obviously he hasn't been as good as his Cincinnati days. He's only $3,000 though. Don't mind him. You have Ty France, Adam Frazier, J-Rod, who obviously has tons of speed if he can get on base, batting cleanup. I don't mind that at all. Suarez, is he a strikeout machine? Sure, but he still has some pop in his bat. JP Crawford's been hitting the ball really well this season. I don't mind them. I'm not in love with the Mariners, but on such a small slate, I think you have to at least get to some exposure.
Yeah, and there's some cheap bats like Kyle Lewis at 2,000 definitely interests me if he's in the lineup. Just a dead minimum on FanDuel. He's 3,000 on DK. That's a pretty good price just for all the talent in him. He's a guy that you have to take advantage of when he's actually on the field because he's just so injury prone, unfortunately. But he's a monster talent. There is a lot of talent in that bat. So I like getting to him. I can put him together. It's interesting. The projected lineup, I kind of like the 4 through 7, Julio Rodriguez, Eugenio Suarez, JP Crawford, Kyle Lewis, more than I like the 1 through 4 with Jesse Winker, Ty France, Adam Frazier, Julio Rodriguez. So I think there are some interesting ways to put this team together. What about the A's on the other side? Is there any reason in the world to throw A's stacks back at Robbie Ray with all that ownership? Maybe is that a good leverage play? They're crazy cheap.
Yeah, on paper, I mean, you really have no reason to want to stack the A's, but you have to think of it from a DFS perspective where if Robbie Ray is going to pull in close to right now, I'm not sure if I updated it, but I'm seeing close to 80% ownership on Robbie Ray over on DraftKings. That's still correct. Yeah, if we're gonna have a pitcher at nearly 80% ownership, I think you have to at least get some stacks against him, no matter how bad the offense is. It's not like Robbie Ray has been as good as he was last season with Toronto. I mean, you have Sheldon Neuse up top. Chad Pinder's always had a little bit of pop versus left-handed pitching. Sean Murphy. The names are not good, but there is some righties in here that maybe could give him some damage if Robbie Ray happens to walk a couple guys and gives up like a 3-run shot.
And we've seen that from Robbie Ray a million times, right? We've all had those Robbie Ray days where he's in our lineups and he walks 6 hitters and gives up a couple big shots. And the numbers are there to support that idea this year. Like you said, the strikeouts are down from 32 last year to 25% this year. The walks are back up to 8.9. It's not the double-digit walks that he used to put up, but it's close. He's given up a 40% hard hit with a 3.56% home run rate. Last year, the home run rate was 4.27% with a 42.9% hard hit. So there are reasons to expect a much, much better team than this could get to Robbie Ray. I'm still concerned about the quality of hitters that we're stacking here, but I do think it's warranted, first against the ownership that Ray's pulling in, and then second, because there are, again, as it was yesterday, there are at least 4 hitters in that DraftKings lineup priced at the dead minimum. So you can just do interesting things with that team, right? Just the way they come together. So I think it's worth at least considering. They're owned in the mid single digits, so it's not like it's difficult to get at or about the field here. And as bad as they are, I do think it's worth doing. Anything else to call out from this one, or we'll jump on to a quick read here and then into the Brewers game?
I just want to mention the Oakland A's on the top stacks tool. They're actually do have the most positive leverage as of right now. It's because their ownership is so small, but if you can get some positive leverage like that in a small slate, I think it's worth it.
Yeah, and again, if you're doing that with 3 or 4 hitters in that lineup that are also minimum price bats hitting like in the middle of the lineup, you're getting to a really interesting opportunity that's going to allow you to go out and buy some of the better pitchers. Now, you're leaving Robbie Ray on the table if you're doing that, of course, but you can go out and buy yourself, Yu Darvish, Julio Urias, and all the good bats to go alongside those lousy A's. It's not the greatest plan in the world, but it could work.
It's baseball. Anything can happen.
Exactly. And that's the game we're playing. And that's, especially on a short slate like this, we're going to see some weird things from time to time. And you want to be a part of that. You want to capture that upside when those weird things happen.
Yep.
So if you're interested in stuff like that, guys, and if you want to get access to all the great Awesemo Plus tools and content for nearly every DFS sport out there with an Awesemo Plus Platinum plan, that you can do that at the site. That includes access to all the premium content and tools on Awesemo.com, which includes player projections, ownership projections, the lineup builder, our premium Discord channels, and much, much more. If you're a new user of Awesemo Plus Platinum, you can save 50% on your first month of Awesemo Platinum. All you have to do is click the link that's down there somewhere in the description and enter the code MLB Strategy Show. All caps, all one word, MLB Strategy Show. That's MLB Strategy Show for 50% off your first month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. Again, that's for new users only. Of course, if you're only interested in playing MLB DFS, you guys know this. You can sign up for an $18.95 weekly plan for MLB DFS. Fantasy Cruncher is not included in any of this. It's always going to be a paid add on our site, but it's a great tool. It's a great value add. Stop guessing. Start winning today, guys. Man, that was a long one. We'll talk about our pals' prize picks in a little bit, but let's get through this game first. We've got the Brewers and the Padres. Aaron Ashby on the bump for the Brewers here. Lefty, 7,200 on DK, 65 on FanDuel. Yu Darvish drawing a little bit of attention, kind of the second prime pitcher on the slate here. Yu Darvish going for the Padres at around 40% owned. What do we like about the pitchers here? Or would you get to any Ashby? Is he a viable value consideration on either site?
Yeah, Ashby's interesting. He's been out of the pen, but with Peralta out, he should definitely slot into the rotation for a while. We know he's got decent stuff. Pulling up his numbers really quick. So Ashby so far this season, we're talking 28 innings. He's got a 3.4 xFIP, looking like a 27.6% K rate. The walks are definitely up, 14% walk rate, but he doesn't allow any power. 65% ground ball rate. I don't mind it. I'm not sure I really want to pick on San Diego too much. I know they're not the same offense without Tatis, but still a sub-4 implied run total again. So I don't think he's a bad option, but I'm not really excited about Ashby.
Yeah, I think maybe he's a little bit sneaky, 7%, 6,500 on FanDuel. You can do some interesting things with that price. I don't really mind tangling with this Padres lineup all that much. I'm just pulling up for going into yesterday where they were against lefties. And it's against lefties. It's not the greatest spot in the world, actually. 7th with a 122 WRC plus, only a 20% strikeout rate. So not a great spot there for him. And then he looks like he's topped out at 85 pitches. Yeah. He pitched into the 80s twice, into the 70s once. So might not be completely fully stretched out. So you might not get that quality start bonus out of him on the FanDuel slate if he manages to pitch cleanly. So I don't love it. Probably not a great spot there. 22% on DK is probably just a little high owned and a little bit more expensive than I'd like to pay for an arm like that. So I think I'm with you. It's not a great spot. What about Darvish with a little bit of popularity on him? 9,000 on both sides.
Yeah, so like we talked about, if you're getting away from Robbie Ray from the massive ownership, I don't hate getting to some Yu Darvish because you got to spend some money somewhere. You're not going to load up on Blackburn, Ashby, and Fede. So I think Yu Darvish would be that guy you kind of slide into. 3.5 implied run total against him. Slight favorite here. I think he can get you 6+ strikeouts here versus the Brewers. I know his numbers haven't been amazing. 4x FIP and a 19.6% carry, but I have to imagine that K rate's going to come up as the season progresses. The walks have been down, not allowing a lot of power, only 22% hard contact rate. It's not like if this was a huge slate, I'd be in love with you, Darvish, but with the lack of options that we have in the low implied run total for the Brewers, I think I'm going to get to some Darvish.
I think it makes sense. 20% ownership on the FanDuel slate at 9,000. That's, perfectly acceptable. You can work with that. It looks like he's slightly negatively leveraged as if you're going straight by the numbers, but on a short slate like this, where just on pure talent, we kind of have to consider Robbie Ray and Yu Darvish on a tier separate from everyone else. Maybe you could throw Julio Urias in that tier on a good day, but I think that negative leverage number is perfectly playable for Yu Darvish in this situation. I would look to be at maybe even a little bit above the field on the FanDuel slate. And I think if you're pushing like 40% of them on DK, you're probably fine at that price too. What about the Brewers on the other side of that equation, though? They are a decent lineup with some good sticks, a little bit of pop. You going to any Brewers stacks here? You grabbing any one-offs from that team? What are you doing against Yu Darvish here?
Yeah, not a team I'm going to get to a lot of. I think if you're going to use anybody, Christian Yelich or Tellez might be the two I get to the most. Colton Wong's fine. I'm not a huge power guy up top. And if I'm going to go with anybody with Yu Darvish, I want some power threats. Obviously, no Hunter Renfroe right now. He's better versus lefties anyway. But Christian Yelich, I know it's kind of obvious, but he'd be the one I try to get to as a one-off versus Darvish.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And, Yelich is still kind of down in people's esteem. I think still only 3,700, 4,900 on DK, pulling 13% ownership from site to site. He's up to 5 home runs, a 171 ISO, but he's still creating runs 13% better than average. He's hitting the ball in the air again, like we've talked about a few times on shows, 53.5% hard hit with a 14% barrel rate now going into yesterday. So there are very encouraging signs around Yelich. Rowdy Tellez obviously has been just on fire through most of the season. So yeah, those are the priority bats there. What about pods on the other side? Any love for any of these Padres bats?
I mean, there's one obvious guy here, and it's Manny Machado. I mean, he's been, I'm sure on all the, I know you have the home run model, and if you're just looking at his numbers versus lefties, it's not even fair. He's absolutely crushing them. So if you had to get one guy, it's Machado. After that, the lineup's just not amazing. I mean, you have Luke Voigt, who's really cheap at $2,100, but he's cheap for a reason. Will Myers. It's really going to just be like a bunch of Machado for me as a one-off. If you want to get through some mini stacks, that's fine, but I think Machado is by far the best option.
Yeah, that's really the only target for me. I wouldn't tell anybody they were necessarily making a huge mistake if they wanted to put Luke Voigt in here against a mediocre lefty, but I've been saying it since the beginning of the season. I think he's one of the most overrated bats in the sport, and thank you, Luke Voigt, for proving me right so far. I think we can move on from this one. We're going to jump into the main slate in just a sec, but let's do the PrizePicks read real quick because I do think it is on the board there. Yeah, it is. PrizePicks, and then we'll go into the main slate.
All right.
So let's see here. PrizePicks. You guys know about PrizePicks by now. They're daily prop-based contests. It's a great site to go on to. You can do multi-sport entries. You can net up to 10 times your entry fee if you hit one of the 5x 5 times cards, 5-player picks. I can't say this properly. I need to rewrite this thing for myself so that I can get through this PrizePicks promo because it's all in bullet points on our end. But the point, guys, is it's a great site to play on. We've got people winning over there with our free projections constantly. All you have to do is go to our site, pull up the free projections, sort it by the win rates, and start plugging in these picks. You need 5 of them to win 10 times your entry fee on the site. If you go to PrizePicks, you can plug in promo code Awesemo. That's all in caps, all one word. They'll give you a $100 first match deposit bonus. If you click the link in the video description below, you head over to prizepicks.com, or you can download the PrizePicks app in the App Store or on Google Play. Use your knowledge of multiple sports. If you got things you like for baseball, things you like for NBA, you can put those together on the same card. Go win some money, guys. Check it out. PrizePicks is a great, fun site to play on. All right, let's move along. I stumbled my way through that one, but I got to figure out how to read that a little bit better. Let's move on to the Marlins against the Tampa Bay Rays. This one's only on FanDuel. The next one's also only on FanDuel, starting at 640 over on that site. Cody Poteet on the hill for the Marlins, going against Drew Rasmussen for the Rays. I think Rasmussen is a decent pitcher. Both of these guys pitching to a 22.4% strikeout rate, interestingly, so far. But I think one of them is more appealing than the other one. Talk to me about the two pitchers here. What are you doing with these guys?
Yeah, I mean, if I had to pick between the two, it's gonna be Rasmussen for me. I believe he started last time. I was on a show and I'm pretty sure he balled out in that start. Gets a good spot here versus Miami. He's been solid this year at 3.19 xFIP, 22.4% K rate, 5% walk rate. Doesn't give up any power, good ground ball rate, obviously a good pitcher's park over in Tampa, $8,600 on FanDuel. Not like a top priority for me, but if you're getting to some Rasmussen, I have no problem with that. I'm not too scared of that Miami lineup, and I like the park that he's in for sure.
Yeah, Miami's an interesting team. They're, maybe a little bit frisky in certain spots, but I think Rasmussen, enough talent to get through them here, pulling in just 9% ownership on this FanDuel slate for 8,600. Seems like a playable spot here. So I think that's a one that I'll definitely be looking at. I hope that ownership stays low because the Marlins are a team that I do like to target despite their friskiness up at the top of the lineup. Are you getting to any Marlins bats to go against Rasmussen here, or are you just kind of leaving them on the side?
Yeah, it's probably just gonna be a stay away spot for me. Maybe they show up in a couple lineups in 150 max, but if I'm building like 3 to 20 lineups, I'm not getting any Marlins.
Yeah. Yeah. I think they'll come up a little bit for me in crunches, and then maybe some of them will trickle in around the edges with like highly owned stacks because they're all owned in the 1% range outside of Jazz, who's owned at the 5% level. They're all pretty affordable. There's some multi-position. There's a lot of outfielders in the lineup though. So I don't know. We'll see how it comes out. It's not going to be a priority for me, though. I give Rasmussen enough respect there. 0.91 whip, decent strikeout rate, 1.32% home run rate. What about Rays going up against Cody Poteet here? Is there any reason to get to Rays? Looks like the projected's got that weird Kevin Kiermaier leadoff configuration.
Yeah.
To Wander, Yandy, G-Man. Any love for these Rays here?
I don't mind them. Again, 4.1 implied run total. Petit hasn't been like necessarily bad so far. I know he doesn't pitch very deep. I believe he maxed out at 60. I believe it was 66 pitches earlier in the season. Then after that, I believe it was only about 54, and that was a couple starts ago. So I'm not really expecting him to go super deep into the game. Should see some of the bullpen, but 3.5 xFIP for him. Same strikeout rate as Rasmussen, and kind of similar to Rasmussen. He doesn't give much power. Gets a lot of ground balls. Doesn't allow too much hard contact, and less than half a homer allowed per 9. Not a great park for the bats. The Rays have decent offensive players, but I'm just not super excited about it.
Yeah, and no Brandon Lau in the lineup kind of changes the nature of that stack for me. I just don't like it quite as much. I love his bat. I do think you can get sneaky with like a Brett Phillips in there at the dead minimum 2,000. He's an interesting player to me. 4 home runs, 6 stolen bases, only slashing 229, 286, 422, but creating runs 12% better than average. Last year in 292 plate appearances, 13 home runs, 14 stolen bases. He's one of those post hype prospect guys who, has some tools at the dead minimum in the middle of that lineup. I can get behind that a little bit, maybe some shares of Randy Arozarena, but the top end of the lineup is kind of over-owned in the mid-teens for this spot for a 7-game slate. I don't think that's a target for me. Like you were saying, Cody Poteet, for all his flaws, 3.4% barrel rate this year, a 1.18% home run rate over 23 innings. That's not terrible. So I don't love the Rays stack here. I think I would be under the field on it as well. Do you have a favorite bat that you would throw in from the Rays if somebody told you I had to put one in your lineup?
If I had to, it might
one-off.
It might have to be Choi here. It might have to be Choi. He's $2,600 on FanDuel, potentially batting cleanup. Got some pop versus righties. I don't love it, but I don't hate it either.
Yeah, I can get behind that. Getting on base 37% of the time, creating runs 41% better than average to lead the team, second on the team behind Yandy Diaz of all people. So yeah, I think that's interesting. I would get behind the G-Man idea there. All right, let's move along to the Cubbies against the Cincinnati Reds. Cubbies with Kyle Hendricks, the annoying Kyle Hendricks, who every time I say something negative about him goes out and has a very strong start. He's going up against a team that started out as the worst lineup in baseball and has made some minor improvements. They're playing a little bit better in Cincinnati. Looks like they're drawing a hell of a lot of ownership going up against Hendo here. Are you interested in Kyle Hendricks at no ownership at 8,000 on the FanDuel slate? And then Luis Castillo, very cheap, 7,300 on the bump for the Reds, drawing a ton of ownership, going up against a pretty weak Cubs lineup here. Talk to me about both pitchers. Just take the ball and run with it. Yeah,
Hendricks, I can't honestly remember the last time I played Hendricks. I just never play the guy. Like, he doesn't strike anybody out. I mean, gets a little bit of strikeouts, but 16.5% so far this year. north of a 4.5 xFIP, and also giving up quite a bit of power so far this season, close to 2 homers allowed per 9. And I know Cincy's not a great offense, but like you said, they actually have been hitting somewhat well recently. They have Tyler Naquin at the top. Brandon Drury's been doing well. Tommy Pham, Votto, Stevenson. Like, it's not a good lineup, but we are in a pretty hitter-friendly park over in Cincy. Also looks like it's going to be pretty humid there today as well. A slight chance of rain, so we'll have to see what happens with that. Not going to try to project a rain out or not at 11:30 in the morning. Certainly possible, but I'm not going to really expect it as of right now. I would rather stack the Reds than play Kyle Hendricks. I'm not sure if you're in the same boat there. Like you said, I think they're picking up some ownership over on the FanDuel side, so that could always be worrisome, but I'm not going to be too concerned about it. And as far as Castillo goes, smaller sample size this year, but a sub 20% K rate, not really walking too many guys, getting a lot of ground balls, but giving up some pop over a homer per 9 and 3.5 xFIP. I don't mind using him against the Cubs.
Yeah, it's normally a spot that I would target, especially 7,300 for his talent. I mean, that is cheap, right? We're talking about a guy who has been in the high 20s strikeout rate in his career. Last year, he was just 23.9%, but it was a 3.63 xFIP. The rumors of his demise last year were kind of overblown. He struggled in spots, struggled early, but he came on pretty strong later in the season and improved his numbers a lot. This year, kind of similar, just, it started the season late, coming back from injury, and just has gotten out of the gate a little slow in terms of the strikeouts, in terms of the power. Still just a 3.48 xFIP though. So there are good reasons to believe in Castillo. I just hate that 30% of the field's going to be doing it here. So I think I'm probably going to undercut that, even though I do think it's a really good spot. It's not quite like Sonny Gray against the Tigers level last night, which did, congratulations to the Sonny Gray chalk. You guys managed to pull that one off. But I just don't love the spot with 30% on him here. So I'm probably going to undercut. I'll still have some. What about the Reds bats and the Cubbies bats here? Are there any, you mentioned the top 4 maybe for the Reds side of things, going up against Hendo, who has given up some power this year, who doesn't really strike guys out. They're just drawing a lot of popularity on the FanDuel slate here. They're 4th ranked for probability of success, but they're negatively leveraged. One of the worst negative leverage situations on the board after the Angels. So I don't know that I have much reason to get to Reds bats here, even against Hendricks. Are you seeing it similarly, or are you going to try and get some in?
I'm not sure I'm going to get to the field, but I'm going to get some Reds in because it's not too often we can get a near 5 implied run total for the Reds, especially with how cheap they are. And I just I just don't like Cal Hendricks. So I don't mind stacking against the guy. I know it's not a fun lineup to get to. I mean, there's not really many nice things you can say about Naquin, Drury, Pham, or Votto. And then you have Moustakas and Tyler Stevenson down there, but it's a good park to hit in. Maybe it ends up getting rained out, so we don't have to worry about it anyway. But like you said, some pretty negative leverage going on for whether it's the Cincy pitcher or the Cincy bats today.
Yeah, everybody just seems to be going to Reds, and it is worth mentioning, like you said, the weather conditions, they're not the best. One of the 4 games with a little bit of rain in the forecast that are on this main slate, that's if you're looking at the site that has yellow and red, that one's one of the ones in yellow. So hopefully a little bit less chance. It's calling it a 40% chance of precipitation, but keep an eye on our postponement forecasting in the projections tools, guys. We always cover that. Keep an eye on whatever the news god sends out, and we'll have you covered for the weather going into the main slate later on. On the Cubs side of things, any of these bats interest you? Like any, say, a Suzuki, Ian Happ, Frank Schwindel, any of these guys up against Luis Castillo who can yield power from time to time?
Yeah, there's some strikeouts to be had in this Cubs lineup, but at the same time, there's some guys with some power like Wilson Contreras, Suzuki. He's definitely turning off a little bit from his hot start, but I don't mind some Cubs stack. Like if Castillo's going to be one of the highest owned pitchers, like over on the FanDuel side of things, it's definitely worth to get some Cubs stacks in a pretty hitter-friendly park over in Cincy, assuming weather holds up here. So Ortega's fine as a leadoff option at $2,600. Contreras, Happ, Suzuki. After that, after Schwindel, it really falls off after that. So I'm probably going to stick to the 1 through 5, but I don't think it's a bad contrarian stack.
Yeah, not a ton of people doing it. Happ's the only player really pulling any ownership in there. Probably the best bat on the team right now. 286, 399, 437, creating runs 38% better than average. Sneaky player, but yeah, there's a lot of people going to him. But you can offset that if you're stacking this team with the low ownership on anybody else. I would maybe include Patrick Wisdom from the 7 spot in the projected in that run of decent plays, 10 home runs on the season, a 288 ISO. That's a little tough to ignore, but not, definitely not a star caliber player, just has a decent amount of pop. Anything else to go through for this one? Maybe some sneaky on the red side of things, and Nick Senzel, Colin Moran, if they're hiding down toward the bottom of the lineup. Any interest in those guys at lower ownership?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind Moran. I mean, cheap lefty versus the righty and Kyle Hendricks. Outside of that, it's going to be kind of one through. You can kind of stretch to Moustakas, but bottom half of the order is not great.
Yeah, Moran's a guy I'll still chase against flawed righties. There's just that thought in my head that big day for Colin Moran where he wins us a bunch of money is in there somewhere. I've just liked him for a long time in terms of the contact profile and stuff. So minor shares of him maybe down toward the end of the lineup. Jumping into the game that starts the DraftKings slate. This one's on both, and as are the rest of them that we'll talk about. We've got the Baltimore Orioles in the Bronx going up against the Yankees. Tyler Wells going up against JP Sears, a lefty on the hill for the Yanks. Talk to me about JP Sears. What do you know about him? He's thrown 2 innings so far this season.
Yeah, I know you're a big Yankees fan, so you're probably kind of excited for him to pop up today. But I was looking at his minor league numbers. I believe his last start, he went 4 innings, didn't give up a hit, got a run, 7 strikeouts, and in 21 innings so far in AAA, 38.5% K rate, 2% walk rate, 202 xFIP. I don't think it's bad at his price point, especially versus the Orioles. I definitely think he's worth getting a couple shots in.
Yeah, I think it could be a somewhat sneaky spot, right? It's not a pitcher that's necessarily on anybody's radar going up against a bad team. He's got those strikeout numbers that you mentioned in the minors. I will say that he's not the most highly regarded prospect. He's, if you're going by graphs, he's their 25th ranked prospect organizationally and kind of middling grades, 60 grade command potential, but 50s, 45s on a lot of the stuff on the traditional 2080 scouting. So there are definitely concerns if you're going to go overweight to him. But like you're saying, I mean, last year in AA and AAA, a 30+% strikeout rate. This year in AAA, pushing 38% and not walking anybody. That's totally worth some shots for $6,000 and nobody at all on him on the FanDuel slate, 5,500 and 13.3% on him on DK. I think that's worth a few shots, probably less so on FanDuel where you're probably going to need that quality start. But it's at least interesting. What about Tyler Wells on the other side going up against the Yankees here, pulling 15% ownership for 5,300 on DK, no ownership to speak of at 67 on FanDuel. Any reason to go to him on either side, or are you just kind of avoiding the Yankees bats as far as the value pitcher goes?
Yeah, I can't do the Tyler Wells experiment today. I'd much rather play Sears at a similar price point because the Orioles are just not good versus left-handed pitching. And then at the same time, the Yankees, they have a lot of good numbers versus right-handed pitching. Only 20% K rate this year. Double-digit walk rate, lots of power, 117 WRC plus, and better splits versus lefties. But I mean, they can still mash either way. And Aaron Judge has been absolutely on fire, even though he kind of sucked last night and had his overs on PrizePicks. Didn't work out quite well, but I think they can definitely bounce back pretty well here versus Tyler Wells.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a spot I think we can target some bats in the stack there. You get the weird flawed back end of the lineup. The projected that I'm looking at is now includes Estevan Florial, Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, Rob Brantley at catcher, and Marwin Gonzalez rounding out the Yankees lineup. So not exactly the superstar laden lineup. Stanton came out of the game with a sore calf yesterday. So we'll see what rolls out of the dugout today for the Yanks. But I think that at least the top end is going to be worth getting to. You get a little bit of ownership offset on Judge, maybe at 15% for 6,200 on DK. He's owned nearly 30% at 4,600 on FanDuel, just super popular. But a lot of the other guys you can use as one-offs. You can get to in small stacks. So definitely lineup dependent here for the Yanks, though. What about the top end of the Orioles lineup? Like 1 through 6 is interesting to me against an unproven lefty pitcher. Everybody's going to be hitting from the right side of the plate. There's some interesting bats. They're not prohibitively expensive. They're not drawing that much ownership. Would you take out some hedge stacks against those Sears shares?
Yeah, I do like Sears, but at the same time, I don't think it's impossible for me to get to some Orioles stacks because some of these guys do have some decent pop versus left-handed pitching. Trey Mancini, Anthony Santander. Austin Hayes was a guy who played a lot versus lefties last season, was doing pretty well. Hasn't been as great this year, but potentially batting cleanup. I don't mind it. Ryan Mountcastle. And you have Adley, obviously recently called up. I don't mind it as a somewhat contrarian stack. I pulled the top stacks tool. They are picking up just about, I believe, our worst top stack percentage in the top stacks tool. So it's not much to talk about, but at the same time, there is slight positive leverage on them if you want to roll with them.
Yeah, and again, it's a team where we're talking about targeting a middling prospect rookie in, I believe, his first major league start, just because of how bad they are. So keep that in perspective when you're deciding whether or not you want to stack Orioles against him here. But yeah, I'd be looking at like Cedric Mullins, Trey Mancini, Santander, Hayes, Mountcastle, Rutschman, and stopping there. If you wanted to bolt on a Jorge Mateo as a wraparound from the 9 spot, if that's where he's hitting, fine. I like him less hitting 7th. I would like him more if he was hitting up toward the top of the lineup, but he probably won't be. Outside of that, yeah, I don't need any like Ramon Urias. I don't need much Rougned Odor against the lefty here. So anything to go through? Anything left on the table for this one?
Nothing for me. I'm just kind of excited to see what Sears can do so far.
Yeah, it should be a fun spot to watch him pitch here. So we'll go into let's do the Phillies and the Braves, and then we'll do another quick advert here. We've got the Phillies with a Ranger Suarez, the lefty on the mound, 19% strikeout rate for Suarez. Pitching okay under the covers, though. It's not actually as bad as I expected so far this year, but going up against a deadly powerful Braves lineup. Braves countering with Charles Morton on the mound, pulling in a decent amount of ownership, 30% for 9,000 on the DK slate. 10% popular on the FanDuel slate at only 8,800. Are you interested in either one of these pitchers, and which one and why?
I'm not sure how much I'm going to get to either of these guys because both last season, Ranger Suarez was pitching very well, and the same could have been said for Charlie Morton. Both these guys are kind of crashing back down to earth. I mean, Ranger Suarez, a 4x FIP, 19% K rate, which is down, and Charlie Morton's way down from last year, 4.72x FIP and a 20% K with the double-digit walk rate. So he's definitely been falling off quite a bit. I realize he's getting up there in age, so at some point it had to happen. And it's not a good spot for either of those pitchers. I mean, Suarez going up against Atlanta, tons of power. They do strike out a lot. A lot of guys that strike out a ton, but versus the lefty, I think that'll help him a little bit. And then for Charlie Morton, Philly's obviously a very tough lineup to get through as well. I mean, if you're just looking from top to bottom, Rhys Hoskins, Alec Boehm, Harper, Castellanos, Schwarber, Segura, there's no easy outs in this lineup. Even at the bottom, you have a guy like JT Realmuto, Herrera, but I mean, if they're going to be looking at the ownership, I believe they are picking up. So Morton's coming as the third highest owned pitcher. Suarez is coming as the fifth. Both of them are pretty even as far as the leverage goes. I wouldn't mind being even in the field, but I'm not going to make any strong stances on either Morton or Suarez today.
Yeah, I'm with you. The strikeout, if Suarez was pitching with the strikeout rate from last year, I'd be kind of interested because he has been pretty decent with suppressing power, only a 2.87% home run rate this year, 32.8% hard hit, 8% barrel. Last year, he was even better for contact, 0.96% home run rate with a 31% hard hit and a 2.6% barrel. If that guy was still here pitching to a 25% strikeout rate, I'd like that a lot against this team because, like you said, they strike out a ton. They're 29th out of 30 teams in baseball against lefties with a 28.6% strikeout rate going into yesterday as a unit, but they're also 6th by ISO. They're 11th by WRC plus. They're 8th by home run rate against lefties. Philly on the other side, like you mentioned, kind of similar coming back the other way, 22nd for strikeout rate, but 7th for home run rate, 10th for ISO against righties. So it's two dangerous teams. At the high ownership on Morton, I'm probably not going to go there. I wouldn't go there on the DK slate. I would maybe grab a few shares of Suarez here just for the strikeout upside, the potential that it comes back at 8,300 and only 2% owned on FanDuel. That's at least a little bit interesting, but I'm definitely going to take out some shares of Brave stacks to hedge against that if I do it. And I'm skeptical as to whether or not it'll even come through my sorting process just with where he's projected. Are you interested in Braves bats going against Suarez with his ability to suppress power, or is it kind of a write-off for you on both sides?
No, I think you have to have some Braves exposure. I mean, they strike out a ton, and I wouldn't mind getting to some Suarez, but we're still talking about the team with currently, I believe, the second highest implied run total on the slate. We know they have a ton of power versus left-handed pitching. I mean, you have Acuna, Contreras, Ozuna, d'Arnaud, even Olsen can hit lefties fine. I wouldn't mind keeping him on your lineups in tournaments. Albies, Riley, Duvall, Swanson. Like, we're looking at pretty much an already lineup besides Matt Olson. So at the same time, while they strike out a ton, there's a lot of power to be had, and it can go either way. So I definitely want some exposure on the Braves.
Yeah, and it's a lineup that, I talk about a lot. I write about a decent amount, and it's one of the teams that just plays 1 through 9 for me, especially on DK where you can get Travis d'Arnaud in the catcher spot. But I think 2,900, he's, especially when he's hitting cleanup, he's kind of interesting even on FanDuel. He's on that list of catchers I'll play. And then you get bats like Austin Riley, Adam Duvall, all his power, Dansby Swanson hiding down toward the bottom of the lineup. I really like owning this team, and I'll roster them 1 through 9. So I think they're a little bit under-owned. A ton of people are going to Acuna on the FanDuel slate, 22% popular, 14% on DK for 5,800. I think he's worth putting in your lineups despite the weight of popularity, despite, the lack of power so far, only a 161 ISO over 75 plate appearances going into yesterday, but it's stolen 8 bases and is very productive on base all the time, creates runs. So yeah, I'm going to this team pretty heavily here against Suarez, but I think I will have a minor stake in Suarez because he's only 2% on, like I was saying. What about the Phillies on the other side going up against Morton? You mentioned a few bats that you like on that team. Are you stacking Phillies, or is it just maybe grabbing some one-offs and moving on?
I think you should get some Philly stacks. I mean, Morton hasn't exactly been great this year. I think a lot of his ownership's kind of off name value from last season as of right now because the numbers aren't really backing up the numbers that he's pulling in as of right now in Philly. And if you're looking at the top stacks tool, they're not that far away from the Braves as far as being a top stack, and they're top four as far as all the offenses go, and they are gaining some positive leverage. So I wouldn't mind getting some Phillies. Are they expensive? Sure. I mean, Hoskins almost 5,000 up top. You have Bryce Harper, who's always expensive, $6,000, but he's been crushing it so far this year. Castellanos, I prefer versus lefties, but it's fine if you're doing a full on stack. Carl Schwarber's obviously got pop versus righties. But yeah, I'm definitely going to get some Phillies. They're going to be lower owned than the Braves, and good tournament spot.
Yeah, they're all very low owned. It is another pitcher who is pretty good at suppressing power upside. So there's that minor concern there. That's coming through a little bit for both teams in my home run model, where all these guys are falling below that magic number of 10. But I am getting a little bit more power in the, call it the power index on the Phillies side of that equation. So I think that would be my spot that I'm going to be looking to stack at least some of. Like, it's easy enough to get over the field where the field is at. So you can grab some of those bats that you mentioned and probably be pretty okay. And I do think, like you said, JT Realmuto hitting down toward the bottom of the lineup, super sneaky on both sides. So that's interesting to me. Let's talk real quick about your opportunity, gang, because now is the time. Right now, apparently before the end of the show, I don't know, but now is the time to check out our best bets package. You can click the link below down there. You subscribe as our team of experts use Awesemo's industry-leading projection models to identify the best bets available in the NBA, MLB, and more each day. We're confident these bets will be worth more than the price of admission. So click that link below and start betting today. If you want a free preview of our best bets, follow @AwesemoBestBets. It's our Twitter handle @AwesemoBestBets. Turn on notifications and we'll be posting one free premium bet every single day. That's a pretty good way to make some easy money. Our best bets is pretty awesome too. We're providing picks every day. We've also got the Discord channels for the best bets package. So there's guys talking shop in there all day long. Get in there, find some bets on things that you might not be considering, guys. Check out Odd Shopper as well. We've got tons of great sports betting content going on at both sites. Let's dive into the next game on deck. We got 3 more to go. We've got the Guardians against the Astros. Guardians with Cal Quantrill on the mounds, priced in the 7,000s, no real ownership to speak of on either site because he's going up against one of the best lineups in baseball. Astros countering with Christian Javier, who is pulling a decent amount of ownership at 9,300 on the DK slate. I'm really interested in that. 8,200 on FanDuel, only half the ownership he's getting on DK, 16% over there. Let's start with Javier. He's kind of interesting in that spot. Why do you think he's pulling so much ownership at that high price on DK?
Yeah, I thought he was coming in a little bit overowned. Was my first reaction on that. I mean, I know he had a good game last time out, so maybe that's one of the reasons why. And if you're looking at the strikeout rate so far this year, smaller sample size, but 31.5% strikeout rate. And I mean, that's obviously very good, but he gives up a lot of fly balls, 52%, 40% hard contact rate. And my concern here is that the Cleveland Guardians just don't strike out. Like, a lot of those guys just have a ton of contact. They're only striking out 18.9% of the time versus righties this year. They have a 162 team ISO and a 118 WRC plus. I know Cleveland's not the best lineup out there, but they're a very annoying and pesky lineup, which makes it kind of tough for me to roster pitchers against them a lot. So if he's going to be really popular at $9,300, I'm probably going to be underweight.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's the move. He's a pitcher that I really like. He's on a ton of my season-long teams. I wanted him as that hybrid guy who could pitch out of the pen, high strikeout rate, put into the starter spot and just run with. I typically run 0 starter for season-long, so I loved him for that. They moved him to the rotation. The success has been there, but I just think 36% of the field at 9,300. Yeah. I just think it's a little bit high and in terms of the price, and it's a little high in terms of the ownership, and against the team that, like you said, doesn't strike out very much against righties, has flashed some power against righties, has been great for run creation. Yeah, I'm with you. I think I'm here for the undercut and maybe stacking up some Guardians. Outside of Jose Ramirez, they're all very low owned, so they're easy enough to get to. They're pretty cheap. What about Cal Quantrill on the hill for the Guardians? Is there any love for Quantrill going up against the lethal Astros here, or are we just kind of looking at bats from both sides?
I'm going to have to get to the bats. I can't recommend playing Quantrill versus the Astros. A 15% K rate this year, an XFIP that's approaching 5. Doesn't have bad power numbers given up, less than a homer allowed per 9, but I could certainly see that number going up a little bit after today's game. I just big fan of the Astros. They're currently pulling in, I believe, the most ownership as far as let's see. No, not the most ownership, but they are the top stack as far as our projections go over on the top stacks tool. And I believe they actually have some slight positive leverage. So if they're going to have positive leverage, I want to get to a lot of Astros today.
Yeah, it's been just one of the mantras that we say on all these different shows. When the Astros are positively leveraged, just go to them, just play them. And there are some pockets of high ownership, like a Jordan Alvarez, 15% on DK, 20% on FanDuel. But there's also pockets of low ownership, like Julie Gurriel hitting right after him at 4.6% on DK and 2.8% on FanDuel. You can just put these guys together in the order in which they appear in the batting order and be fine as far as ownership goes in stacks, because there are so many low owned guys. Jeremy Pena, Chas McCormick in the single digits down toward the bottom of the lineup. Nobody likes playing Martin Maldonado, but if you need a super cheap catcher, every now and again, he can hit one out of the ballpark. That said, he's creating runs going into yesterday anyway, 68% worse than average. That's not very good. So maybe it's a 1 through 8 kind of a stack for me, but yeah, I'm going to be heavy Astros. What about the Guardians? We talked about their lack of strikeout, a little bit of power. They flash power in the aggregate, but maybe not a lot of individuals with a ton of power. Jose Ramirez drawing some popularity, but nobody else really. Are you stacking Guardians? And if so, who are you interested in?
Yeah, I could definitely get to some Guardian stacks. I might end up being more so like a mini stack rather than a full-on stack. But looking at a guy like Josh Naylor, I don't think he's someone we should ignore. He's actually been really good this year. I mean, I believe his ISO is sitting at 4, or not 4, that was his WOBA. Either way, it's really high. I think it's a 282 ISO so far this season, a 191 WRC plus, and a 615 slugging, I believe. So yeah, he's been absolutely killing it. I wouldn't forget him if you're going to do a full-on stack. I know he doesn't have great name value, but he actually has been pretty solid this year. And like I said, these guys are very annoying and pesky, where maybe they don't have great power numbers with guys like Miles Straw. But I mean, they get on base, and they don't strike out, and they make contact, which makes it a real tough time for the opposing pitcher. So I don't mind getting some mini stacks there. Full stacks, probably not going to be my favorite.
Okay. Interesting. That's I think I might stretch out for some full stacks, just because I do like hitters like Andres Jimenez, who's hiding in the 6-7 spot typically for fairly cheap, low ownership, multi-position eligibility, and then Ahmed Rosario up at the top of the lineup to kind of sandwich those guys around the Jose Ramirez, Owen Miller, Josh Naylor, who I think is absolutely dynamite, shout out by you, and somebody who belongs in stacks in this lineup. And then maybe my struggling guy, Franmil Reyes here. Franmil striking out 39% of the time, 200, 255, 285 triple slash, a .085 ISO that is not at all like him, and only 3 home runs. But he's still making 53.3% hard hit with a 16% barrel rate at 2,500 and 2,800 across sites and no ownership. I still want to get invested in that. So I might stretch out for some more Guardians here. I do like that. Naylor, like I said, great call by you there. A lefty bat with a ton of power, 50.7% hard hit and 11.9% barrels. You can sign me up for some of that as a one-off in stacks. So I'm maybe a little bit more enthusiastic about the Guardians than you are. They also have a bunch of players with multi-position eligibility, which I like to just mess around with and put together unique combinations of lineups. So I'll have some. We'll see where it ends up once we start running crunches. Anything else to shout out from this one?
No, I think it's actually going to be a pretty fun game to see how it shakes out, especially ownership-wise with Javier.
Yeah, for sure. That's going to be an inflection point on this slate for sure. And I'll be digging into that later on in my article. I'm pretty confident because he's a pitcher I typically write about when he's on the slate. We've got the next one up, the Battle of the Sox here. The Red Sox with Richie Hill, the lefty on the mound, going up against the White Sox with Lucas Giolito, one of the aces of the slate on the mound, drawing interesting ownership at only 20% for 10-3 on FanDuel. Massive popularity at 9,800 on DK, pushing up over 50%. Let's start with Giolito. What do you see on for him going up against the Red Sox here?
Yeah, I know he's about $500 more expensive than Javier, but I feel a lot more comfortable with Giolito than I think I would be with Javier, especially with the ownership that he's pulling in. But Giolito so far this season, really good. 2.6 xFIP, 34.5% strikeout rate is giving us some pop, but not a lot of hard contact whatsoever. I'm hoping Boston got all the runs out of their system from yesterday after they absolutely exploded. I believe they ended with 16 runs. At least that's when I stopped watching. But either way, it was an absolute bomb fest versus Dylan Cease and whoever else came in. But hoping they got that other system. I don't mind getting to a lot of Giolito just because of the strikeout rate. I know Boston's got a very good lineup top to bottom. With Kike, Devers, Martinez, Bogarts, Verdugo, Story, who's been one of the hottest hitters in baseball recently after kind of a cold start. But I'm going to get to a lot of Giolito just because of the lack of true aces up top, and I like that strikeout rate.
Makes sense. Looks like we've got some spam fun going on in the chat. You would think that you would be able to spell a 3-letter word correctly if you were spamming people that much, but here we are. So yeah, I do think Lucas Giolito is super interesting, particularly on FanDuel. Like I'm willing to spend up to that 10-3 price on FanDuel for only 20% owned Giolito here. 34.6% strikeout rate is appealing to me. Red Sox have been better in recent games, but I think there's enough on the bone for a pitcher of Giolito's caliber. What about Rich Hill? Are you getting any of him? He's super low owned from site to site. White Sox have not been great, or at least as good as we thought they were going to be this season. So far, I think they'll come around, but are you getting to any Rich Hill, maybe potentially a little bit sneaky, or is he just kind of meh, low strikeout rate kind of guy and not really appealing?
Yeah, having a hard time to get to Rich Hill here because the White Sox have plenty of guys that have a lot of pop versus left-handed pitching, plus Rich Hill. I mean, 4.4 xFIP, 18% strikeout rate, doesn't walk anybody, doesn't give him much power, hard contact, but we're still talking about a lineup with Tim Anderson up top, Andrew Vaughn, AJ Pollock, Jose Abreu, Monty Grandal. Like, this is not an easy lineup to navigate. I would much rather get to White Sox bats than I would want to play Boston or Rich Hill.
Yeah, I think that makes some sense. It's a spot where I don't think even I'm going to do it, to be honest. It's very low ownership. It's 7,500, but there's probably just better spots on this slate. And I was saying that the White Sox have, kind of underperformed expectations in the overall, but against lefties, they've actually been pretty good. 126 ISO is sixth best in baseball, only strike out 19% of the time. So yeah, I think I would probably go more toward the White Sox bat side of this one. They're drawing a ton of popularity though. Mid-teens down the lineup from pretty much everybody on the FanDuel slate. Yasmani Grandal, Joan Moncada, oddly under-owned on the FanDuel slate, and then everybody in the 20s to mid-teens on DK. How are you stacking up these White Sox if you're going there? Like, who are you looking at in this lineup that's maybe under-owned?
Yeah, the problem is a lot of these guys are going to be pretty high owned. Like if you want to play Pollock, I mean, obviously he's in a great spot versus a lefty, but he's also pulling in around 20% ownership right now over on DK. Tim Anderson's looking at close to 20%. So the way you're going to have to do it is you're going to have to get a little bit different. You might have to bypass guys like Tim Anderson, AJ Pollock, which does not feel great. They're definitely some of the best projected players, but maybe just sticking with guys like Grandal, Moncada. It feels gross to get to Garcia, Engel, and Harrison, but you might have to do it in some lineups. They get a little bit different because they're pulling a lot of ownership in from top to bottom.
Yeah, it's an ugly back end of the lineup for sure with Leary, Engel, and Harrison. Each one of those guys, I feel like, does have those random games though, right? Like we've all been burnt by a weird Leary Garcia, 30-point FanDuel performance in random spots. So I'll give him a little bit of room. 2,100 for him, 2,100 for Harrison on FanDuel. No real price or ownership to speak of on or no pricing anyway, problems on DK, but drawing some ownership like Harrison in the 9-hole, 13% owned. That's a little bit of a tough ask. 3% owned on FanDuel is a lot more friendly at 2,100, but still just not a good player. I'd be focused on 1 through 6 really if I'm stacking this team. I don't know how much I will do it though. I'll probably be under the field on both sites if I'm rolling out 150 here. What about the Red Sox against Giolito? Any love for the JD Martinez's, Rafael Devers, Xander Bogaerts of the world?
Yeah, I'm going to have a lot of Giolito on this slate, just chasing that high strikeout rate. But at the same time, you can always see a guy like Devers giving him some trouble, but I would have a very hard time playing Devers at nearly 6K as a one-off on this slate versus Giolito. So I'm probably not going to do it, but I will say, I mean, obviously a lot of people didn't expect Boston to pop off last night versus Dylan Cease, and it happens. Like we say, anything can happen in baseball. So if you're playing 150, you want a few percentages on Boston, you can do it. Looking at the top stacks tool, currently the second best odds to be or the second worst odds to be a top stack. They do have some slight positive leverage, but it doesn't take much to get some positive leverage because they're not pulling in much ownership whatsoever, about 3.5% right now.
Yeah, everybody in the lineup very low owned, which is the appeal here, right? We're paying prices, we're drawing down against one of the better pitchers in all of baseball, but you're doing it with some pretty premium bats at very low ownership. So I think it's worth getting to and probably pushing above the field. Single digit ownership on even like a Alex Verdugo from the left side of the plate is kind of interesting for 2,700 if he's in the middle of that lineup. Trevor Story has been pretty on fire the last couple of weeks. JD Martinez, Devers. I can get to this lineup probably more than the field is, and I'll just take my shots. They're not quite on that list of when they're low owned. I have to play them, but I think they're low owned enough on this slate and well priced that I kind of want to. As much as I don't like going to the Red Sox for anything, I think I kind of have to here. Is there a favorite bat for you on either one of these teams?
And for right now, ownership aside, AJ Pollock from the White Sox, he just makes a lot of things work. I mean, hitting near the top of the order, $3,200. We know he's got pop versus lefties. He'd have to be my favorite. I know that's a chalk donkey play, but
Nah,
I mean, projection wise, it's good.
yeah, I think it's the right answer too. He's cheap for how talented we know he is. 3,200 on DK, 2,700 on FanDuel. That's why he's so popular. But I think that's the right call. That's a spectacular spot.
Yeah.
Last game on deck. Let me make sure I don't have any business to clean up before we jump into this one. We did the best bets. We talked about PrizePicks, our great sponsor. Make sure you hit the like and the subscribe, guys. We're up putting this stuff together. You guys have no idea how much of a pain in the ass these run sheets are to put together for these shows when there's a lot of games. Oh God, it's the worst thing in the world. So hit the like and subscribe. Thank us for all of our hard work here. Really helps us out. We love all you guys and we appreciate it. Last game on deck, the Rangers against the Angels. Rangers have Glenn Otto on the mound going up against Reed Detmers, the lefty for the Angels. What are we doing with Glenn Otto? Is there any reason to play Glenn Otto? Fairly low priced.
Only reason you would play Glenn Otto is because there's a lot of strikeouts in this Angels lineup, but at the same time, you have some of the best bats in baseball in this lineup with Ohtani, Mike Trout, Rendon, Walsh. Doesn't look like Taylor Ward might not be in the lineup. So outside of that, I mean, I just don't really want to play Glenn Otto. I'd rather get to the Angels today with a close to a 5 implied run total.
Yeah, I think that makes some sense, at least in a vacuum when we're not considering ownership or anything. We'll talk about that Angel stack in a sec. What about Reed Detmers going up against this Rangers team here? Not drawing all that much ownership at 7,900 on the FanDuel slate, 84, drawing a decent amount of popularity on DK. Are you getting any Detmers here?
Yeah, I was kind of surprised that he was looking like the fourth highest owned pitcher on the DK side of things because the 84 and a bucks, I feel like I'd rather just take some shots on a guy like Sears at 5,500 bucks in a softer matchup. I know Detmers had that one really, really good game earlier in the season, but I mean, we're talking about a guy with an 18% strikeout rate, a 4.4 xFIP. Does it really feel that right paying mid 8K for him? I don't think, in my opinion. Like I said, I'd rather just take a flyer on Sears and hope he can just get me 4 to 5 innings with maybe 1 or 2 runs. I think that'd be a lot better value than paying $3,000 more for Detmers versus Texas, who's not the worst lineup out there.
Yeah, and Texas kind of like right in the middle of the league in a lot of the categories against lefties. They're sitting exactly at league average for WRC plus going into yesterday anyway. 12th for home run rate, 14th for strikeout rate, and 13th for ISO. But they're not bad, to your point. Like, it's not like you're attacking a really weak lineup. There are some downright very good hitters in that lineup from the right side of the plate. And with his limited strikeout rate, his limited major league repertoire, I got in trouble and he threw a no-hitter the last time I said this, but he's a pitcher with a plus curveball and kind of a lack of major league ready stuff the rest of the way. I know he threw that no-hitter, that great game, but like you're saying, 17.9% strikeout rate over 34 2/3. That's more who he is right now, giving up some premium contacts. So I think I can talk myself into some Rangers stacks. They're getting some ownership attention though, too. Do you like any Rangers bats there, or is it maybe an undercut to where the field is? Because the field's over 10% on a lot of these guys, into the 20s on some of them.
Yeah, looking at the top stacks tool, kind of surprising, but they are drawing some negative leverage because Detmers is pulling some ownership. It looks like people are going to get to the Rangers as well, which I get. I mean, I'm not too scared of Detmers here, and I'm hoping the Rangers go a little bit lower owned than what we're projecting because I'd like to get to some of these guys, potentially having Eli White leading off here versus the lefty Marcus Semien, who I know has not been as good as he's been in Toronto, but he's still sub 4K over on DK. I don't think he's like a necessarily bad play today. Corey Seager, I'm hoping people kind of stay away from him because it's lefty on lefty. But if you like the Ranger stack, you got to assume Detmers isn't going to last too deep into the game, and he'll see it right at some point anyway. And then Adolis Garcia, Mitch Garver. I mean, I think the top half's not bad to get to.
Yeah, I'd be mostly focused on that top half as well. Any love for if you're playing that game of Detmer's probably not going to be in here long. Would you play Cole Calhoun and just hope that you get 2 plate appearances against a righty reliever late in the game and some home run upside?
Yeah, the only way I'm doing that is if I'm doing a 150 build tonight. If I'm someone that's doing like 3 max or 20 max, it's going to be really tough for me to get to. But if I'm doing a full on 150 MME, yeah, I can definitely get this swing Cole Calhoun. Like, that's one of my favorite things to do in tournaments is people don't like those lefty on lefty spots. But if you're stacking the team, you're assuming that pitcher's getting beat up and not lasting too long, and they'll see a righty at some point anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an underrated and probably under discussed aspect of stacking is, going to those oddball plays that people tend to avoid. Like in particular, lefty is one of those the most powerful ones to look for. So I'm with you on that. What about Angels? How are we dealing with the popularity? Both Trout and Ohtani in the 30s, the high to mid 30s on FanDuel. Mid 20s for Trout on DK, low 30s on DK for Ohtani. Everybody else in the teens. How are we dealing with the ownership on this team? Because I agree. I think it's a good spot against Glenn Otto.
Yeah. Only problem is, like you said, they are drawing in a ton of ownership, but I don't mind eating it. I mean, Otani, Mike Trout, obviously, arguably the two best plays in the entire slate. You can almost say that each and every single day. These are two of the best bats in baseball. Mike Trout's obviously one of the best, if not the best player of all time. So, yeah, I mean, you can make a case for all the Angels here. Jared Walsh, like the price point below 4K. He's drawing close to 20% ownership. Unfortunately, though, Anthony Rendon, no Taylor Ward does bump this lineup down a little bit, but I mean, I'll eat the ownership here. I'd rather maybe get a different mini stack in mixed with them or getting some lower owned pitchers with the Angels. That's kind of one way you can kind of combat a fully on chalky lineup.
I think there are ways you can put it together. I'm with you. I'm primarily interested in like the top four, the Otani, Trout, Rendon, Walsh part of the combination here. Brandon Marsh, potentially a little bit interesting. 3,300 DK, 3,100 FanDuel, 5% FanDuel ownership, 12% DK ownership. Decent bat, decent prospect profile coming up. 4 home runs on the season, 3 stolen bases, a little bit of power, a little bit of speed. If he gets on, I think he's a relevant correlation play at the very worst. Creating runs 13% better than average. The bottom end of the lineup with Suzuki, Tyler Wade, Andrew Velasquez, I don't really need any of. So I think I would use Marsh kind of as the stopping point, as the bottom of the stack there. Any love for the bottom end of the lineup? Like, would you play any Tyler Wade across 150 lineups in the infield if you're rolling out Angel stacks?
Oh man, the only thing I can maybe get to is some Velasquez, just because it's the shortstop position at $2,100, and he could kind of be that wraparound stack guy if you want to do the 1 through 5 and leave off the 5-hole hitter. You could get Velasquez, Otani, Trout, Rendon, Walsh, which isn't terrible, but man, I don't want to play Velasquez too often.
Yeah, not a bat that I like including in lineups. 2 home runs, 6 stolen bases on the year, but creating runs, what's that, 32% worse than average. So not great. Also a little wrinkle with what you just said there on FanDuel. Velasquez is a third baseman. Tyler Wade has second base and shortstop eligibility for 2,100. So I would not want to waste my third base position on Velasquez on the FanDuel slate. Maybe you stick Tyler Wade in there for the exact same concept that you were saying. Similar kind of players. You could use that as the wraparound as the shortstop or the second baseman at the less fundamental positions. Anything else to cover from this one? Do you have a home run call you want to throw out there? Any big calls you want to make? Anything? Tell the people where they can find you, and then we're going to punch out of here.
Yeah, I mean, we just talked about them, but top home run call is going to be Mike Trout and Shohei Ohtani for me tonight. Also love Kyle Tucker. And if you want to get a little bit different, I don't think Josh Naylor is a bad home run call as far as lower ownership goes. We talked about him, insane power numbers this year, but yeah, it was fun doing the show. I mean, I think this is our second one together. Hopefully we can get some more in the future. Do enjoy doing the shows with you. And if you want to find me, Matt Crispin on 16, I don't tweet much, but I am available if you ever need to ask me a question.
There we go. And he's also hanging around, I'm sure, in our Discord and answering questions in there sometimes for everybody and all of that too, guys. So yeah, this was a fun show. We flew through everything here. Hopefully we covered everything for you guys. Hit the like, hit the subscribe. We've got all kinds of stuff coming up later in the day. 1:30, we've got the NHA No House Advantage NBA show. That's going to be with Greg and Aton. I'm actually bouncing out of that one so I can go get myself a new computer so that I don't zip out of a show too early like I did yesterday. 4:30, we've got PGA Live Before Lock with Rosalind and Ben. We've got 5:30 MLB Live Before Lock with Aton and Neil. 6:30 NBA Deeper Dive with Josh and Adam. 7:30 to 9 o'clock. Greg and Ryan bringing you the NBA Live Before Lock and going into a half hour into game time. So check all that out. Hit the like, hit the subscribe. We really appreciate you guys. We're out of here.